The Breakfast Huddle replay from Money FM 89.3.
Money FM 89.3. You're in the Breakfast Huddle with me, Manisha Tank, Elliot Danker and Ryan Huang. A very good morning to you this Wednesday. It means it's our sustainable day. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. But first, 2019. What a year it's been.
You know, I wouldn't call 2019 a horrible year like some people, but I would say it's been an incredibly disruptive year.
Yes. It's drawing to an end, and the trade outlook in Singapore is appearing to be rather bleak as our exports continue on a downward trend, which started 8 months ago.
Well, that's not really surprising because, after all, Singapore is a small economy. Trade exposure runs as high as 396% of its GDP. So this means really that any shakeups in the global economy we're going to feel.
Yeah, despite a downtrend, though, the third quarter of 2019 sees the economy growing 0.5% year on year. And this is slightly higher from the revised 0.2% growth in the previous quarter and an earlier official estimate of 0.1%.
So looking ahead for 2020, the Ministry of Trade and Industry says it's expecting growth to come in between 0.5 to 2.5%. But, you know, growth in several of Singapore's key final demand markets, such as US and China, that's expected to ease. So really, what can we expect in the year 2020?
Yeah, that's one of the questions. Also, are external factors like the USChina Trade War causing the downtrend in Singapore's economy? Let's answer those questions and much more. We have in the studio Raymon Krishnan, who is president of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society from right here in Singapore. Great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me. First time on radio, so looking forward to it.
Excellent.
Ups and downs of the trade and supply chain industry in Singapore. That's the picture we're getting. In your opinion, Raymon, do you think this has been the worst year for Singapore in the last decade?
The worst year? Well, let me try and put that in context as well. I look at it a bit differently. Why? Because when there's actually challenges, that's also where there are opportunities. So rather than everyone going around saying that's all doom and gloom and it's all bad news, even this year or in the coming year, we look at it a bit differently, that actually from all these challenges, there are opportunities for us to redefine or redesign our supply chains, look at new market opportunities, and also look at new ways of doing business.
Okay. And have we fulfilled that given the disruptive 2019 that we've had so far? Or are we en route to fulfilling that?
Well, I think it's a yes and no answer.
Okay, sure.
It used to be in the 90s, for example, when there was an economic slowdown. It was global and across the board and across all markets, especially from a freight or logistics perspective.
Okay.
What you'd see is slowdown means every trade lane or every shipping route would see drops in volumes. But that's not what we're seeing today. What we see today is it might be slower trans-Pacific eastbound, that's from Asia to the US.
Okay.
But intra-Asia volumes, for example, is still holding fairly constant. And year on year, even though it is challenging, we are seeing global growth in shipping volumes. So yes, it's challenging. It's not growing as fast as we would like it to, but it is growing. And in that growth, there are certain market opportunities that companies can take advantage of. And that's what we're seeing. So if you want to leave things status quo and look at, say, for example, shipping from China to the US, yes, you are going to see some challenges. But actually, there's even a movement called the Anywhere But China movement. So companies looking at trading and producing and manufacturing outside of China. And that trend has been going on since 2011 even.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is very interesting what you're saying, because it's making me think of two experiences that we've had right here on the show. So one of them is around, you know, we keep talking about how there's this sort of pivot to ASEAN, and there's so much growth and potential when it comes to logistics and supply chain in the ASEAN region. And actually, this is something that getting behind the ASEAN idea and the more regional engagement is something that the Deputy Prime Minister has talked about at the Straits Times Global Forum, for example. But also, we had Lazada on the show. So Lazada now talks of itself as being a logistics company and just massive, massive growth. So is that what we're saying, that actually these more robust economic numbers that we're getting, is that part of having ASEAN on our doorstep?
Again, not a straightforward answer.
Okay.
There are opportunities. There is strong growth within or in the ASEAN economies, but the challenge that we're seeing is that there isn't that much growth in trade intra-ASEAN. it's very complex, but the volumes just don't support that.
Okay.
So there is growth. There are growing economies. Lazada, for example, pointing out or calling itself a logistics company. But that's very much due to domestic demand. So that there is growth, but it isn't the intra-Asia growth or ASEAN growth that we talk about.
Right. You mentioned an anywhere but China movement that started back in 2011. I think I can guess your answer to this, but then is it fair to say that the US-China trade war is the sole cause of the perceived slowdown that we're seeing, since there is this movement to look at other means?
No, I don't think so. I think it does contribute to it, but
Sure.
we've got so many other factors out there. We've got Brexit. We've got what's happening in Europe. We've got what's happening in Hong Kong, even closer to home. That's put their economy into a recession. So it's not just the US-China trade war. I think it gets a lot of airtime, particularly because it is the US
It
and
is
China.
the US and China.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's not solely because of US and China. We've had a good run from an economic perspective, and it's now time for a slowdown. And there are many factors causing the slowdown. You can't keep seeing global growth continue year after year.
I'm curious where our region is concerned. What other countries are also experiencing a slowdown? And just looking at the ASEAN region or the Southeast Asian region, where does Singapore rank in terms of this slowdown? Are we holding our own ground well enough?
I don't have the numbers offhand.
Roughly.
Roughly, I don't think Singapore's holding up that well compared to our neighbors like Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. I think Indonesia reported just a couple of days ago that there is slower growth year on year, but they're still at the 4% mark.
Because they're emerging economies.
Yes.
Right. So speaking of growth, we've had these revisions in Singapore's 2019 growth forecasts. We had the third one for 2019. Do you think that these predictions about the economy are realistic? And do you put yourself behind this idea that things are going to pick up in 2020?
Oh, for sure. I think we are due for a slowdown, but we're very optimistic, and all the companies that we work with who are members of the society are also quite optimistic in what they're doing. They are looking at, for example, from the hiring front. Very few companies I speak to say that there's a hiring freeze. That's one of the first things that companies do, So they are still looking at hiring. They're a bit more cautious in their approach. But no, I think 2020 is going to look positive.
Very standard question that you probably get when you face challenges. It's always, how do you solve these challenges? Right now, we've got challenges with trade. So, Raymon, in your opinion, what can be done to solve the current challenges that we're going through? Or if you have some examples of how companies are trying to solve these little problems?
Okay. Well, I think you need to really pay attention to what's happening out there. The challenge again, of course, then is there's a lot of noise out there. If you look at what's happening between the US-China trade deal, one day it's hot, one day it's cold. There's a deal in sight just around the corner, or there's no deal. So you do need to pay attention. Then you need to separate the wheat from the chaff and look at new opportunities. And I used to run a business back in the 90s.
Okay.
And that was during the Asian economic crisis. And it was one of the few years that we had that were very, very good for our business. Because why? There were lots of government subsidies and grants out there. Businesses were more realistic or employees were more realistic in what their expectations were. They were willing to work harder. They were willing to contribute more because they knew it was challenging times.
Right.
And during those years that I ran my business and until I sold it, that was one of the most profitable years we ever had. So actually, from all these challenges, there are opportunities. You just need to watch and take advantage of them.
Speaking of opportunities, let's talk about free trade agreements. Do you think that Singapore SMEs in particular are taking advantage of free trade agreements to the best of their potential? And also, let's just talk about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Is that going to be something that will help underpin Singapore's economy?
The short and sad answer is no. We did a poll 3 weeks ago of our members, and of the 100% of the respondents, the first question was, have you heard of RCEP? And 100% of the respondents said yes, they did. The next question was, do you think RCEP would benefit your business, or will you be making use of RCEP? Only 15% of respondents said that they would.
Okay.
The third question was CPTPP, the revised TPP, which came into force in January this year. So the third question was, have you heard of CPTPP? And the answer was yes, from all the respondents. And 0%, not a single respondent said that they saw any benefit in CPTPP. So 0%, and this is the business community or the supply chain community, people who ship stuff, people who work in organizations, freight forwarders, manufacturers, so on and so forth. So it's unfortunate that free trade agreements like RCEP or even CPTPP, which are mega FTAs, a lot of SMEs do not see the benefit. And this is not just SMEs, these are multinational companies as well who make up our membership base. So the short answer is no.
Why is that? Is that because the agreements don't actually serve them, or is it because there's a lack of understanding?
I think it's a combination of the two, especially with RCEP. It's been many years in the making. I can't tell you how many years, but many, many years. I think a lot of people were very focused on CPTPP. Whenever we polled someone, one of our members, or when we were speaking at a forum and we mentioned RCEP, everyone in the room, until it was announced just a few weeks ago, would look confused at what's RCEP, and you have to explain to them it's a mega FTA with 16 countries, ASEAN, and now India is also 15.
Yeah.
But people, the business community just doesn't really pay attention to it. They don't really care. I think there's a bit of maybe fatigue around it, and there's also maybe not enough communication around the benefits of a free trade agreement. Because if you're an SME, think about it. What's most important to you? Can my product sell? Do I have enough money to run my business? Can I hire the right talent? What's next year going to look like? Am I going to be able to sell my business or get more investors in? The last thing on my mind, or perhaps number 333 on my list of things to do is, what is this free trade agreement and how is it going to benefit me? You know, so there's not enough communication around it, perhaps. Is there a lot of interest from the business community? Perhaps not, because especially in Asia, if you meet a roadblock, what do? You try and find in Singapore, you try and find a legal way around it to do business. So if the free trade agreement isn't to my benefit, so what? If it is, I'll take advantage of it.
Let's look closer to home, because Raymon, you mentioned earlier there are a lot of other factors other than the US-China trade war, Brexit, and most recently, Hong Kong has come into the picture. Are we benefiting from the unrest, do you think?
Unfortunately, I think yes. Unfortunate, why? Because of what's happening in Hong Kong is very sad. But the upside for Singapore is that I'm seeing more and more companies and organizations even. So companies looking at where they used to have a base in Hong Kong and Singapore, they're looking at investing more in Singapore instead of Hong Kong.
Sure.
Or I'm getting more and more calls from people saying that if we needed to move our organization or operations to Singapore, what do we have to do? So there's more interest. So the short answer is yes.
Is Singapore also perhaps falling in line as a bit of a contingency plan for people who are so used to doing business in Hong Kong? Similar landscape in that sense?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and it's it's relatively easy also if you want to set up a business here too. I think that helps.
Is.
Okay, let's talk about Cargo Now 2020. So this is an event that will be held from the 11th to the 13th of March next year, and it's co-organised by Sphere Exhibits, which is the events arm of SPH, together with the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society, so you guys, and Logisim. So tell us a bit about the event, what the theme will be, how many people you're expecting to come, that kind of thing.
Okay, so Logisim has been running for about 7 years now. We started out back in the day where it used to be a meeting of just the members, and we went public 7 years ago. And next year with Cargo Now, what we're doing is we've taken an area at Singapore Expo, and aside from running the symposium that normally sees about 400 to 500 participants, we're also going to have an exhibition, and we're targeting to have 3,000 to 5,000 people visit us over those 3 days. So we've got exhibition booths, and we've got the symposium running concurrently.
Cargo Now is in its 8th year, right? Or would be in its 8th year.
Yes. Cargo Now with Logisim.
Yeah.
This would be our 8th year of running it. So Cargo Now is a new brand that we have. And the reason why we came up with that is because, we talk about Singapore and the opportunities that you see in Singapore.
Sure.
And if we want to maintain our position as a logistics hub, it's not just about being the busiest port or second busiest port in the world and having a good airport. It's also about having that infrastructure. And that infrastructure, the ecosystem, is about having a good legal system, good banking and finance, good place for people to meet and do business.
Yeah.
So Cargo Now hopes to achieve some of that. It's a platform for people to come in, people in the supply chain community, to actually meet talk, discuss, debate, and also take part in this exhibition over 3 days at Singapore Expo.
It somehow just reminded me of something else that we've talked about on the show, which was we had the European Chamber of Commerce here talking about the European Union Singapore Free Trade Agreement. And there was one standout feature of it, and the point of Cargo Now becomes very relevant here, that goods which are being assembled here and shipped from here will be included in this agreement and can benefit from some of the tariff changes. Is that a big deal? And is that the kind of thing that you will discuss at an event like this?
It would certainly be a topic for discussion, yes. Although, as far as, say, Singapore and Europe is concerned, there would not be that much product that's actually assembled or manufactured here in Singapore. We're not really a growing manufacturing base, unfortunately. But it is something that will certainly be discussed, and we have a track around free trade agreements and trade policy where we'll be looking at things like this.
Yeah, maybe you're going to be addressing all those SMEs who don't understand how the agreement...
Well, they're more than welcome to attend, yes.
I think this conversation really illustrates how Singapore is en route to becoming a hub for everything.
Yeah.
Eventually, we'll see that change in some kind of tourism sell. Singapore, the hub for everything.
Yeah.
We've had with us in the studio Raymon Krishnan, is the president of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society. Raymon, thank you so much for taking the time this morning.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a good experience.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at moneyfm893.sg or download the SB